I'm from Dawn Farm. Dawn Farm is a treatment program in Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, Michigan, and I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful for a couple of reasons. One is the quality of this conference has been outstanding. I've been really impressed. We don't have anything like this in Michigan. The other reason I'm grateful to be here is because I left in the middle of a snowstorm and we had an ice storm on Monday night, leaving us without power. So I've been asked to speak about clinical humility, and I'm going to talk about that in the context of Dawn Farm's story. I myself am a person in recovery, and when I got sober, one of the things that was said to me was it's important to get humble or you'll end up being humbled. And Dawn Farm has been humbled. So I'm going to share a little bit about that with you. I'm going to start off telling you a little bit about who we are today to provide some context, and then we'll go back through our story. So this is the farm. It's a 36-bed long-term residential facility. The length of stay is anywhere from 2 to sometimes even longer than 4 months. The average stay is somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 months. It's a male and female facility. We are a mix of public funding and private funding, and it is an actual farm. So we've got donkeys, goats, sheep, llamas, bunnies, all sorts of animals all over the place. Treatment centers are known for having kind of euphemistic names, like there will be Sunny Acres that's housed in a hospital. So a lot of people are surprised when they pull up and see that it's actually a farm. We've got another long-term facility in downtown Ann Arbor called Dawn Farm Downtown. Very similar, the only differences are size and setting. It's in town and it has 13 beds as opposed to 36 beds. We've got a detox center called the Spera Recovery Center in downtown Ann Arbor, and it provides detox, kind of a social detox, it's non-medical, and recovery support services out of there. And at any given time, about half of the 18 beds are for detox. The other half are for what we call it outreach, but you might call it short-term emergency residential treatment. So people might be there as long as 30 days. The Spera Center has 3 goals. One is to provide a safe and supportive place for people to begin their recovery. The second goal is to introduce people to the recovering community as soon as they're well enough. They go to a couple of meetings off-site every day, and there's a lot of activity there, which we'll talk a little bit about later. And then the third step is we know this is only a beginning, so figuring out what the next step is going to be for people and helping make that happen. So there's a lot of case management there. And in the Spera Center, a lot of the people there are homeless. That program is primarily publicly funded. We are non-medical, but we have a very good relationship with the hospital, the local hospital, so people who are at risk of, say, seizures or something like that are able to be taken to the hospital. The hospital will prescribe an outpatient phenobarbital taper, and we're not allowed to prescribe that, but they're allowed to bring that back to the facility with them and take that so they can detox safely. We've also got an outpatient office, which is a pretty typical outpatient office. We've got discovery groups, which are for people who may or may not be identified as having a severe substance use disorder. And that group helps them explore their substance use and identify what goals make sense for them and make plans to achieve those goals. Then we have recovery groups for people who are identified as substance dependent and are working towards recovery, and then relapse prevention to help people maintain recovery. All the services there integrate DBT as well, which is integrated throughout our programs. And one of the things that's a little different from typical outpatient programs is it's kind of a hangout. People come there and hang out before groups, after groups. They work on our computers to try and find jobs because a lot of them are homeless. And so having access to a computer is an important thing for them. We also have sober housing. We've got 13 sites and 180 beds around Ann Arbor. And we ask people when they move in for a commitment of at least 6 months. There's nothing binding about that. We used to have a limit of 2 years, but we've gotten rid of that limit. The average stay is somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 months, but people can stay as long as makes sense for them. There are no clinical services built in. However, a lot of people in sober housing do participate in other Dawn Farm programs like Outpatient. Every site has a live-in house manager, many of whom are people who went through our sober housing or treatment with us. And it's pretty structured. They have a curfew of 11 during the week and 1 on the weekends. Everybody's expected to work full-time or some combination of school, volunteer work, and employment. And they're expected to be pretty involved in the recovering community. And that's been going for close to 20 years. We also do outreaches in the jail, and we work with community corrections on trying to keep people out of the jail. We do a lot of community education. We have a community education series that runs 9 months out of the year, a Teens Using Drugs program, which is to help people identify whether an adolescent in their life is using drugs or alcohol, and then the second part is what to do about that. We host college classes, nursing classes, social work classes, medical classes at Dawn Farm routinely and expose them to our clients, and we do some training with them. And we go speak to community groups like Kiwanis, Rotary, that kind of stuff in schools. And last year we spoke to almost 6,700 people. We also have had several babies born at Dawn Farm, about 44, not at Dawn Farm. Just livestock are born at Dawn Farm. But we've had a lot of pregnant moms come to treatment, have their baby while they're in treatment, or sometimes they have their baby and then come to treatment. So we have parenting classes, we have specialized case management to help them, and we've got a limited number of sober housing units for custodial parents. So we've got a pretty complete continuum of services. So now I'm going to go back to the beginning and tell you a little bit about our history. So we started in 1973. A couple of recovering alcoholics were concerned about the lack of treatment options at that time. In Michigan at that time, you had a couple of options if you're an alcoholic for getting treatment, but if you're an injection drug user, they wouldn't admit you. So your options were to go to Synanon, which if you're ever bored on a Friday or Saturday night, Google Synanon, you'll spend hours, because Synanon had devolved into a full-blown cult by 1973. And the other option at that time was a federal narcotic farm, which was housed in a federal prison in Lexington, Kentucky. So your options were a cult or a prison. So these guys rented out this old hippie dope house in rural Ypsilanti Township and turned it into a treatment program, modeled it after a program in Quebec called Spera, and started taking people in. They actually lived in the house. They were not addiction professionals. They didn't know what they were doing. They were just people who cared about the issue. There was no licensing at the time. There was no public funding, and they were supported entirely by charitable gifts. That was the original farmhouse. It was a dump. A few years later, we got some donated siding, and that's what it looked like until it burned down. It burned down about 12 years ago. So some of there was an electrical fire. Fortunately, nobody was home, and we had built the other facility on the same property long before. So some of the core beliefs and values we were built on. One was that values mattered, that it's important to know your values, identify your values, and operate from your values. We believe strongly that any addict or alcoholic can find recovery. I started at Dawn Farm as a BSW intern in 1994, and my first client was a guy who had 36 prior treatment admissions. 18 were methadone, 18 were drug-free. He had 2 stretches in prison and was facing habitual charges for a larceny charge, which meant he was looking at a very long stretch in prison. And he had every strike possible against him. And he is still clean and sober today, lives in a bigger house than I do, drives a nicer car than I do. And one of the things I learned over these years in the field is I'm not able to pick who's going to make it and who's not, which leaves me in the position of treating everybody like they're capable of making it. So we believe there is no such thing as a hopeless case. We always believed that recovery was a long-term process. When Dawn Farm started in 1973, treatment was like 6 to 12 months. and it was 6 to 12 months up until 2000 or 1999, I think. And though we didn't have much long-term recovery support at that time following treatment, our approach to dealing with recovery as a long-term process was to make treatment endless, so up to a year. We've always treated the disadvantaged. Dawn Farm has always existed for the people who don't have other options. So we don't turn anyone away based on ability to pay. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't mean we're able to just kind of swing open the doors and welcome in everybody. We have wait lists for people who don't qualify for public funding and are unable to pay for treatment themselves. But we do have those wait lists for anybody who's a Michigan resident. People moving into transitional housing or sober housing don't need any money to move in. They can get a job, and once they start getting a paycheck, they can pay their program fees. So that was always an important core value. And we always built programs around people, not around money. I don't know what it's like around here, but in Michigan, especially when there were more federal grants available, we would get calls all the time from other agencies saying, hey, we're working on a federal grant. Do you want to come on board? And we would say, well, what's it about? And they'd say, well, we haven't figured that out yet. And we'd say, well, why don't you come back to us when you figure that out? We've got 12 steps to program development. It was kind of fortuitous that they just ended up being 12 steps. But we don't look for money until step 9. The steps before that are identifying the community need, asking ourselves whether we're competent, is somebody else more competent, that kind of thing. So that was always important as well. And work and accountability have always been an important part of the program. The joke in the community, and in particular in jails for people coming to treatment, had been that Dawn and Dawn Farm stands for drug addicts working for nothing. And so people would come with the idea that this was some kind of work camp or something like that. The truth is chores are about 2.5 hours a day. And most of the chores are the kinds of things people do in homes, like laundry and vacuuming and cooking meals, that kind of stuff. So they do take care of the animals as well. But we believe if you're going to live in a place long term, it's important to be a contributing member of that community. And it helps prepare people for employment following treatment. Big emphasis on community within programs, and community and being a part of the larger community. We've always believed that the recovering community, we've always professed to believe, I'll get to that in a moment when I get to clinical humility, we've always professed to believe that the recovering community is more important than we are. It's important to think of Dawn Farm as a helpful adjunct to the recovering community rather than the recovering community being a helpful adjunct to Dawn Farm. And part of that has always been, in our mind, this concept of recovery literacy. And in order to explain that, my boss, Jim, often talks about growing up eating Chinese food every Friday night with his parents. And they would go to a place called Pearl's Chinese Diner, and they'd get, giant crab rangoon and egg rolls and fried rice. And if you would ask Jim, as a young adult, do you like Chinese food? He'd say, I love Chinese food. If you asked him, do you know a lot about Chinese food? Oh yeah, I've been eating it my entire life. And then he went to Kowloon and learned that he knew nothing about Chinese food. And a lot of professional helpers, their knowledge of the recovering community is just as limited as Jim's knowledge was of Chinese food. And a lot of that information has gotten secondhand. We send people to mutual aid groups, they come back and tell us all they did was talk about drinking, it made me want to drink. Everybody there, it was depressing, that kind of stuff. So a lot of professional helpers are operating on that kind of secondhand information and aren't really recovery literate. They don't know that, oh, this is the young people's meeting. Oh, if you're not into a higher power and a 12-step recovery, oh, there's refuge recovery and smart recovery, and I can introduce you to this person. So that's always been an important thing. And recovery is a culture that, especially for our clients who are often very chronic, very high severity, very late stage addicts and alcoholics, and for them, addiction wasn't just something they did, it was a culture that they lived within. And so helping people identify the ways in which their identity is built around a culture of addiction was important, and then helping them facilitate an identity shift to a culture of recovery was important. So our clients they will talk about while they're outside, having a cigarette or something, which I hope to eliminate that someday. You know, hey, that's culture of addiction, the way you're glamorizing your drug use, or the way you're talking about the police, that kind of thing. So they're pretty literate in that. So I came to the farm in 1994, and up until 1994, Dawn Farm had been just a long-term program. We had 2 sites at that time, and you had to be between the ages of 17 and 35. And the county approached us, and the state, and they let us know that they were going to be shutting down a neighboring program because the executive director was paying herself an unusually large wage, and there was a lot of petty cash that was unaccounted for. So we ended up taking over their program, and we doubled in size overnight and ended up adding services that had never been part of our approach before. We added a detox program. We had never done detox. Our whole identity was long-term. So the idea of doing a program that was 3 to 5 days just didn't fit within our identity. It was difficult. It was challenging. We added a women's transitional program for custodial moms, shorter length of residential treatment, and we got rid of our age cap at that time. A few years later, another important thing happened. Our detox had really started to change the way we thought about who we are and what we did. They were doing a lot of case management and planning for long-term recovery support. They were sending people to sober housing in a town called Pontiac, which is about 60 miles away. Not the most recovery-friendly community. A lot of the transitional housing programs were funded by corrections dollars and didn't have the greatest culture. And they suggested, well, why don't we start our own transitional housing program rather than sending people, to Pontiac. So there was a drug house across the street from one of our treatment facilities, and we had watched the drug trade going in and out of this house, and one day they got physically evicted. And the program coordinator of that program called the executive director and said, hey, great news, the drug house is being evicted. They're putting all their stuff out on the front lawn. So he said, go up to City Hall, find out who owns the house, and see if they'd like to lease to us as a sober housing facility. And we had gotten a grant to do a best practice study for sober housing. And we asked the funder, would you allow us to use the money for the best practice study to lease this house? And we ended up doing that. And we moved 5 guys into a house with a house manager. And there was no treatment programming. These guys were not low severity substance use disorders. And they all stayed sober. And we ended up getting a second house, and they all stayed sober. And it forced us to kind of question, what are the critical elements? What are the treatment mechanisms or recovery mechanisms that help people find stable recovery? So in '99, I had actually left Dawn Farm in 1998, or I planned to leave Dawn Farm in 1998. I cut down to part-time, I went back to get my master's degree, and I had no intention of coming back. And part of the reason for that was the culture. We weren't a well organization. We were insular, we were very punitive. We had and a lot of it was with good motives. We had a strong one bite at the apple mentality. There was this belief where with a lot of our clients, and especially with the public funding system the way it was, we were gonna get one chance to help this person get clean and sober, and we've gotta get everything right, because if we don't get it right, we're not gonna get another chance. And that led to us being very controlling. At the same time, there were a couple other dynamics happening in the field. There was an increased emphasis on professionalization. And so a lot of the non-recovering professional staff who came in and worked for us, they wanted to prove their kind of street cred. And part of their approach was to make sure nobody ever got over on them. And they probably did a good job of making sure nobody ever got over on them, but they also didn't really have supportive, nurturing relationships with people. We became increasingly self-important. We lost the idea that the recovering community is more important than we are. We viewed treatment and therapy as what's going to heal people and the most essential part of helping them achieve recovery. And as a result, we had declining outcomes. We had, about 10% of people staying for the full course of treatment. And if you have 10% of 100 people, that's 10 people, right? And of those 10% who complete, 8 or 9 of them stay sober, you can say you have an 80 or 90% success rate. And you're being precise, but you're not being honest, right? And this was the position we found ourselves in. And that transitional housing program really forced us to take a look at that. My boss was sitting in a community meeting one evening, and it just so happened that the 10 guys in sober housing were present, and the senior residents in residential treatment were present. And he kind of watched all of them work the room. And the people in residential treatment were more self-aware. They were more articulate, had more insight into the nature of their problems and their personal histories and everything. But the guys who were in sober housing were grateful, were better networked in the community, seemed more positive and hopeful. And it was good to see them doing well. But if you run a treatment center and the people in treatment are not doing as well as the people who are getting no treatment, that's a bad day, So that ended up leading to us revisiting our mission statement. Historically, our mission had always been the goal of Dawn Farm is to assist addicts and alcoholics in achieving long-term recovery. Nothing wrong with that. What we ended up adding, and to be honest, I don't know how we got to this mission statement. It's ended up becoming really important. I don't think we had any idea how important it was at that time. But we ended up adding, Dawn Farm will identify and remove barriers that prevent addicts and alcoholics from joining the recovering community, which seems like any other mission statement, nothing all that special about it. But what became very special about it for us was that what it emphasizes or what it implies is that what heals and sustains addicts and alcoholics is the recovering community. And our role is to identify what's getting in the way of them joining that community and address those barriers. And there were ways in which it really narrowed our focus, and there are ways in which it really expanded our focus. So, some of the things that get in the way of people joining the recovering community are, treatment needs, and others are family problems. But then there's also stigma reduction and lack of affordable housing. We had never really wanted to be a housing program. We never imagined it getting up to 180 beds, but that became an important barrier in our community. And job skills, that kind of stuff. So when we think about it this way, it's not the treatment provider that's the most important, it's the community, and the treatment provider's role is to make it possible for them to join the community. So this culminated in 1999 where we had a public stakeholders meeting. How many people here are familiar with Bill White? A lot of you, okay. So Bill White is a friend of Dawn Farm, and he came out to facilitate this meeting. So we opened the meeting and we shared, Jim and I were up on stage and a couple of board members, and we shared our new mission statement. We talked a little bit about the ways in which we thought we were doing a good job and how valuable Dawn Farm was within the community. And then we talked about the ways in which we had gone off track. Our overemphasis on rules and treatment, our overstepping into the domain of the recovering community, like assigning step work and that kind of stuff, restricting family visits because we had had so much contact with so many toxic families that we ended up viewing families as a threat to recovery rather than a potential asset. And we had failed to kind of see the barriers that our clients encountered in joining the recovering community. So we shared all that, and present in the audience were public funding sources, a couple of mayors, some university classes, faculty at our 2 local universities, members of the recovering community and alumni, all sorts of various stakeholders from the criminal justice system and elsewhere. And then we said, we're going to shut up and we're going to listen to you. And Bill White played Phil Donahue, for those of you old enough to remember Phil Donahue, running up and down the aisle with the microphone sticking in people's faces. And, we really thought that people were going to say, good for you. Thank you for, taking your own inventory and being brave enough to share it with us. And that is not what we got at all. People opened up on us with both barrels, telling us, you don't know the half of it. And we were getting it from both sides. You know, a kinder, gentler Dawn Farm from alumni, it's going to kill people, you know. It saved my life that you guys were tough. And then on the other side, we get people, you know, accusing us of being abusive and being cultish and that kind of thing. And to be honest, that hour that took place is a day. I was in a daze. It was overwhelming. And it was overwhelming for my boss as well. And the last three people in the auditorium that night were Bill White and my boss and I. And my boss and I were nearly suicidally depressed, right? I mean, it was traumatic. It was the worst night of our professional lives and probably up there in our personal lives. And our impulse was, let's never speak of this again. Let's pretend this never happened and try to look forward. And Bill said, that was the coolest thing I have ever seen. He said, I can't wait to get back to my hotel room and write about it tonight. And we're like, no, you know, do not write about this. And, but Bill being there and framing it in that way was really critical for the way we ended up, kind of the story we ended up building around that night and how it ended up changing our future. And it led to what we considered the rebirth of the organization. Because really we were in danger of going out of existence, you know, within a couple of years if we didn't make significant changes. I'm not sure we were aware of that at that time. One of the first things we started doing was trying to re-engage the community, you know, on this idea that the community was more important than we are. We stepped back from, you know, told staff you were to have no role in step work or anything like that. That's between them and their sponsor. The therapist had taken on this kind of central role in helping people achieve recovery at the expense of the role of their sponsor and that kind of thing. So one of the things that we started coaching staff to do when a client's in crisis, why don't you ask them to call their sponsor and talk it through with their sponsor and then come back and talk to you, that kind of thing. So using their community support. We used to have groups in the evening, and an evening group would end at 7 or 7:30. And our program had always been based on members of the community coming in and picking up clients and taking them out to meetings. And if supports and sponsors showed up to pick people up and take them out to a meeting before group was over, we would be kind. We would invite them in the office, offer them a cup of coffee, and they could sit there and wait and chat with staff until group was over. But then we started to say, wait a minute, if the community is more important than we are, as soon as that sponsor support shows up, we're going to start pulling people out of group, and they can go with their sponsor support, which did not go over well with the therapists who were running those groups. They were offended by that, you know, many of them. I mean, what's going on in that church basement or in that hoopty car that's coming and picking people up is more important than what I'm doing with them. That didn't sit well. And then eventually we asked ourselves, why are we having group at a time that would interfere with people getting picked up by their sponsors and supports, and changed our schedule? We ended up, the original farmhouse I showed you that burned down, we used the insurance money from that house to build this community barn, which is a big space with a kitchen and bathrooms, and it's heated and cooled and everything. And we make it available for the community. So there are 12-step meetings in there. There's a refuge recovery meeting in there. There have been recovery weddings and graduation parties and anniversary parties within the recovering community in there. So that's been a way to kind of entrench the connection with the recovering community. And Spera, the detox program, ended up being kind of the spiritual engine of the whole program and kind of the hub of the recovering community involvement. One of our clients wrote on their feedback form, "This place runs on love," you know, And love is a word that's been removed from treatment. It's considered a boundary crossing, a boundary violation. Marty Mann, who is the first woman to achieve stable recovery in AA and ended up founding the NCADD, which emphasized stigma reduction and advocated for the idea that addiction is a disease. She talked about the importance of love in the therapeutic relationship, and that was something that recovering people brought, but it was something that non-recovering people could bring to the helping relationship as well. So there's love between, we talk openly about there being love between the staff and the clients, but also between the community and the clients and the community and the program. So this is a video that one of our alumni made about Spera. That gives you a sense of what it's like there.
I was addicted to heroin. I remember when I first got here, I said this out loud to people. I said, I can't believe this place exists. I came to Spera with a set of clothes, you know. Spera kind of set me on my 2 feet and gave me the little nudge to meet people in the community. It did a lot of things for me that I couldn't have done for myself at that point. And then after I left Spera, and for years I've come back here to support clients.
What we're really measuring is engagement with the recovering community. So that's Dawn Farm's mission. We're taking people every single day while they're here to meetings and activities in the community. There are people that we're inviting to come here to volunteer.
I mean, it meshes completely. We wouldn't survive without the volunteers.
The people want to come here and they want to help. It's like a mutualistic relationship, Spera and the community.
This town is based around that, and the stigma addiction is not so prevalent here. Even the employers, recovery friendly, they hire people that's in recovery.
And in the absence of that, we couldn't do what we do. So we're not a medical detox, we're a social detox. So really we're providing a safe and structured atmosphere for people to be detoxing. So we average about 40 volunteers and visitors that come up here every day.
I would say 99.9% of our volunteers are in the recovery community. So while they're here doing work, they're also talking to the clients.
They're like, hey, I was here, 2 years ago, and this is where I struggled, and this was what helped me.
The quickest, the most effective way to reach an addict is, another addict.
Nobody really understands it unless you live it.
So who better to reach out and help them?
I used to spend a lot of time here washing dishes. When you were here as long as I was every day, there wasn't a whole lot else to do.
In 2011, I was sentenced on my second DUI offense, and one of the things that I was told to do was get a job or do community service. So I basically spent a 40-hour work week here. It's been a learning experience and an opportunity to relate better to the people around me than I used to. So I know I'm a lot more at peace.
It's so powerful to see someone come in who's volunteering their time, and it's people that have a week sober, it's people that have 10 years sober. And so our clients seeing that positive recovery happening in people's lives on a daily basis, it's amazing.
Or to see someone that has struggled, that is a chronic relapse or something, and then all of a sudden now they have several years sober and they're up here volunteering.
We don't know who's gonna get it this time around, so we give them a chance,
The past December, I've been clean 7 years. So I got 7 years and 3 months now. No big deal. Yes, I love cooking. My mom told me, I watched my mom when I was younger. At first, I probably burnt the food up when I first started doing it. But after that, I got used to what I was doing. It became easy not to burn the food up. It's a fulfilling job that I'm doing. I like doing it. Plus, it's keeping me sober at the same time.
I think that this has probably benefited Elvis in every aspect of his life. I bet he works better with the people that he works with.
They love me when they see me up there. That's why I've been there that long. They love me. Stop smiling. Hey, how are you?
Back when I was volunteering here, this was a total place for me to like fall back on. Like if I was having a bad day, if I were to come down to Spera and to speak with a newcomer, it would offer me a new perspective on my own problems.
I continue to come here because it's an opportunity for me to be creative, to give back to the people around me, to do something that I enjoy, which is cooking. And if things turn out well, I get all the accolades. It's just great. And if things don't turn out well, I don't have to eat it. So what more can you ask?
as a client, you're 4 days into your detox, you're not feeling great.
They're such a mess when they first get here. And then even just in 5 or 7 days or 2 weeks, the change is just, like, I can't even begin to speak on how rewarding it is. And it's such a miracle.
I get to catch you at your worst and then see you at your best.
And nowadays to work here, I think it's a big part of a life I love today too. So, yeah, I mean, I love this place. I think it's awesome.
I'm in a place that's full of hope. Spera means hope.
So Spera, you imagine a detox, especially a publicly funded detox, being a grimy, dingy place full of despair. And it's one of the most hopeful, energizing places I've been, and it's because of the involvement with the community. We got 4 groups a day that are open to the community. People come in for a morning meditation and goal setting group, a morning literature study, and then we have a DBT skills group in the afternoon, and then an evening meditation group, and all those are open to the community. And so I dread the day that we have an accreditation survey and they say to us, you need to do background checks on everybody who comes in this facility, you know, to volunteer or visit or spend time. So hopefully we never have to confront that. But we ended up, so that was the first step, re-engaging the community. And what you see in that video, it took us, 15 years to get there. It didn't start out that way in terms of re-engaging the community. We also started recognizing the need to put the relationship with the client first. We ended up having longer term relationships with clients because we moved them into housing and that kind of thing. And we would see people relapse. They get out of treatment, they'd be doing well, they relapse a month or 2 months later or 6 months later, which historically we would view that as a failure, a treatment failure. Our goal was that this person stays continuously abstinent and in stable recovery. And that those relapses were disappointing. But then we began to realize, you know what? When people used to relapse years ago, we would be the last people they'd want to see. They'd disappear and we wouldn't even know about it. We just know that they were gone. And these days, we're the first people they call when they relapse, or their housemates are bringing them over to detox and we're able to stabilize them in detox and then move them back into housing. And maybe they didn't even lose their job. So that emphasized that the relationship has to be the most important thing, that we want to be the first place people contact when they're in crisis. And that means sacrificing some things for us, right? If somebody leaves under not great circumstances, there's part of us that wants them to say, I'm leaving under not, I was wrong, and that kind of stuff. We want them to admit that they're, they made mistakes or they're doing something that's a mistake. And focusing on maintaining the relationship forces us to kind of let go of our own judgments and, you learned about motivational interviewing a couple days ago and practice that. We got more creative in service delivery, adapting our program to fit people's needs rather than trying to force people into our programs. And a couple of things come to mind. One was we had a guy named John. John was a Vietnam vet. His mother had schizophrenia and was a crack addict, and he had done prison time and was a very complicated case, had HIV and all sorts of problems going on. And everything about him screamed the need for high intensity, long-term services. We got him into residential. He really wanted to succeed in residential, and he really tried hard. But his interpersonal style was very disruptive to the rest of the people in the setting. And we got to a point where it was just too harmful, too disruptive to the other people. And we were like, John, this isn't working. We gotta do something else. And we were honestly ready to cut him loose. And he was so alarmed because he wanted to recover so badly. We said, well, we got this new transitional house. What would you think about trying that? And he thrived. in that. This lower intensity setting where he didn't have to navigate all these personalities ended up being a better fit for his needs, which ran completely counter to our assumptions. We had another client who had similar problems. She would probably be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and was very disruptive with all the women and very seductive with all the men and that kind of thing. And that came to a head. And it turned out she had a very supportive mother who lived not very far away. And we said, well, what would you think about staying with your mom, but coming to day treatment in the residential facility, 5 or 6 days a week? How would that work for you? And we ended up trying that. So rather than trying to get people to fit into our model, trying to adapt our model to meet people's needs, we shifted from treatment planning to recovery planning, where the pen is in the client's hands when we're writing a treatment plan. The idea is that our role is kind of like a contractor when you're building a house. I don't want a contractor that tells me what kind of house I'm going to have, right? I want to tell them what kind of house I want, and they have the expertise to help me build that house, right? So that's the approach with recovery planning. We ended up establishing peer roles that were initially volunteer roles with members of the recovering community, but ended up becoming kind of professionalized roles. Some of the issues we had around family involvement, we told our staff we're not going to restrict family contact in the way we had anymore, which was alarming to them. They're like, there are a lot of problems in a lot of these families. People injected drugs with their parents, women who were pimped by a father, that kind of stuff. And we said, okay, well, what do you need to make it safe for people to have contact with their families if they choose? Well, we need to have a family program. Okay, let's create one. And so we ended up creating all sorts of additional family programming and ended up discovering, we had contact with handfuls of really troubling families, but we had a lot of families that were strong potential allies. And we needed to take advantage of that. When Bill finally wrote the article that referenced us, he ended up including this quote, which at the time really leapt out at me. We must begin to create naturally occurring healing environments that provide some of the corrective experiences that are vital for recovery. He was quoting Sandra Bloom from this book, Creating Sanctuary. And so I ended up looking into this. And one of the things she ended up saying in the book was a physically safe environment, although necessary, was not sufficient. So there had to be other kinds of safety. And that really leapt out at me. And it made me realize that we had safety issues for our clients in terms of long-term engagement. And that we were a physically safe environment, but there were other kinds of safety issues that we weren't identifying and we weren't able to put our finger on. And so she talks about psychological safety, being safe with yourself and free from threats to your emotional well-being, social safety, the ability to make and sustain healthy relationships and to be safe in social settings, and moral safety, having a system of values that are consistent and guide behavior with deep respect for others, and trying to eliminate hypocrisy and that kind of stuff. So as we're looking at this and trying to think about what are the different kinds of safety we need to help our clients establish, all of a sudden we get this gnawing awareness that organizations are living, growing, changing things. And we have complex interactions between stressed clients and staff and pressured organizations and oppressive social and economic environments. And therefore, we are every bit as susceptible to that kind of stress and trauma. And the organization, not just as individuals, the organization is susceptible to that as well. So, we were aware that clients often feel unsafe and are angry and helpless and hopeless and hyper-aroused and everything. But we began to become aware that our staff were having a lot of that same kind of experience. And then, which leaves the organization unsafe, punitive, stuck, missionless. So this created kind of a frame for thinking about where the organization had been, what went wrong, and what we were working on, as we went through this process. So that became very important. And it wasn't just our clients who needed to heal, it was Dawn Farm that needed to heal. And part of that too, that ended up becoming really important. Bill White talked about addicts and alcoholics being like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And it's, you know, it's a very helpful metaphor. Addicts and alcoholics can be charming, likable, engaging, charismatic, and they can be manipulative, dishonest, intimidating, you know, all that kind of stuff. And one of the important questions every professional helper has to ask themselves is, who do you think is the real person? Is the real person Dr. Jekyll, the good self, and addiction distorts their personality in terrible ways? So a lot of the negative stuff we encounter is a distortion of who they really are? Or is Mr. Hyde the real person? And when they behave badly, you know, how do you know if an addict's lying? You know, their lips are moving, you know, that kind of stuff. They're just dishonest people, you know, that kind of stuff. So we really confronted that. We talked about it regularly in staff meeting. You know, we talk about difficult cases and ask ourselves who's the real person, that kind of stuff, and challenge staff to find Dr. Jekyll when Dr. Jekyll wasn't easy to find. And along with these lines too, we encountered this quote from George Vaillant, who wrote The Natural History of Alcoholism. If you want to treat an illness that has no easy cure, first of all, treat them with hope. So again, Bill White talks about, with this whole concept of hitting bottom, there's an assumption that pain is what makes people choose recovery. And when people don't achieve recovery, it must be that they didn't hit bottom. And so therefore, the thing they need is more pain, right? But our clients are homeless. They may have had their children removed. They are, you know, HIV positive or something, facing, you know, terrible consequences as a result of their addiction. Is their problem really an absence of pain? That doesn't make any sense. What's really going on is an absence of hope for a lot of people. It's hard for them to even imagine a better life because of the life they've been living for so long. We also ended up having to confront the issue of discharge. Bill wrote this article, It's Time to Stop Kicking People Out of Treatment. We had a lot of back and forth with Bill while he was developing recovery-oriented systems of care, because we would say, hey, Bill, we're encountering this. What are you hearing from other people? And he would say, funny you should ask. I'm writing something on that. And then he'd call us and say, hey, I'm writing something on discharge, and I wonder what you guys are doing about that. And we'd say, funny you should ask. We're really struggling with this right now. We ended up trying to figure out how discharge fit into providing treatment. One of the places we ended up landing, or kind of themes we ended up settling on, was we had to take a position where we unconditionally committed to our clients' recovery. That doesn't mean that you can stay in this facility no matter what. It doesn't mean that you know, at this particular time, this program, you get to stay here. But Dawn Farm wants to stay engaged with you. We want to support your recovery, which ended up putting responsibility on us to figure out how are we going to do that? What kind of care, what kind of system of care, what kind of roles among our staff will help us stay engaged in people and support their recovery no matter what? So Father Gregory Boyle from Homeboy Industries in LA that works with gang members, one of the things he talks about is no matter whatness. And so no matter whatness became part of our kind of approach to relating with clients and maintaining relationships with them. It forced us to interrogate our rules, you know, rules that were leading to discharge. We needed to ask ourselves, were they really important enough to justify discharging somebody? We had a rule book that was 18 pages long. And you know, you get people who are like detoxing and they come in and the first thing you give them is this 18-page rule book. And you're like, and remember this. And if you fail to remember it, we're going to get you, you know. And so we threw out the rule book. I gave our staff a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and I ripped it in half. And I said, I want the rules to fit on this half a piece of paper. And that's where we ended up landing. But it was difficult for staff to let go of that control. We had to really confront, what are we about? Are we about treatment or are we about recovery? We had this client named Ron, who was a really smart, had a lot of insight, really likable client to half of the staff. probably actually less than half the staff. And he was really detested by the other half of the staff. And that had to do with the fact that he was really sexist. And he was condescending towards a lot of the women. And we had staff meeting after staff meeting where every week on the agenda was, we need to discharge Ron. You know? And one of the questions we ended up asking in that staff meeting is, okay, the way he's relating to people, he's not doing well in treatment. The way he's relating to staff, the way he's relating to some of his female group members, that's not okay. How is he doing in his recovery? And it turned out that he had a huge support network that he had built in the recovering community. And not only that, but at that time, Michigan would give treatment clients $44 a month personal needs money, which pretty much everybody spent on cigarettes. And he quit smoking and saved his $44 a month to go on a 12-step retreat with his sponsors and with his support network. So this guy was doing great in his recovery, but he was doing terrible in treatment. And it really forced us to confront, what is this about? We can kick out people who do, we can generate people who do great in treatment, but if they can't stay sober when they get out the door, if they don't have recovery, then what's the point? And if people are doing well in their recovery, but we're deciding they're a treatment failure, what's that about? That doesn't make any sense. So, that was a lot of work. It was a difficult case. We had to figure out how to sort through that with all of our staff. But it prompted some important questions, including things like planned transfers. We had developed transitional housing, and treatment had gotten shorter over time. But we thought of transitional housing almost as a reward. It was a big carrot at the end of treatment. And when people didn't do well in residential treatment, the question came up, well, why don't we move this person to housing if they're not doing well here? Maybe they do better in that setting, and maybe we get them hooked up with outpatient, that kind of thing. But staff were like, no, that's rewarding bad behavior. We can't just put them in housing. And, well, why not? And it really challenged us to rethink our role and how to keep people engaged without coercion in treatment and create pathways to coming back. So one of the things we've been doing in recent years is focusing on trying to build a recovery-ready community. So we do stigma reduction, a campaign called Recovery is Everywhere. And that started because Jim and I were sitting in his office and we said, when people think of addicts, they think of somebody stealing their TV, right? Going down the street, stealing their TV. And the truth is, my doctor is an addict, my lawyer is an addict, I've got friends who are all sorts of professionals who are addicts. Nobody thinks of them. So we started a campaign called Recovery is Everywhere to try and change that. We started recruiting employers to hire people in early recovery. And this is another quick video. So we got a campaign called Recovery is Good Business. And we recruit employers to hire people early in recovery and be recovery friendly. For example, there was a restaurant that one of their rituals with their staff to try and maintain morale was to give free drinks at the end of shift, at closing. And the employer became aware that's not very recovery friendly and approached us and talked about it and wanted to be a Recovery is Good business. And so we talked about alternatives and ways to support people in recovery, like maybe appetizers, that kind of thing, or sober cocktails. But this is another video made by that same alumni.
So it was a little over 2 years ago that we hired our first person in recovery. This bright young man came in looking for work, and we hired him, and then, through the course of getting to know him, learned that he was in recovery.
Oh, I love this song. I didn't want to hide what was going on in my life. I didn't want to work for an employer who wouldn't hire me because of that, I guess. Another thing that's been incredible about working here is how much Phyllis appreciates our journey. Well, I couldn't do what I'm doing now, getting my life back on track, moving forward, and supporting myself meanwhile, right, while full-time classes without an employer who understands that I just couldn't do it.
We make business decisions that are going to be good for us. And the track record that we've had from hiring and maintaining people who are in recovery has been excellent.
Their job is directly connected with improving their lives. People
Phyllis, the owner of that restaurant, has become one of our biggest evangelists for Recovery is Good Business. She wrote an open letter to other employers in town, and she recruits other employers and has been really important. We also focused on extending recovery support into primary care. We've worked with the FQHC in our community, and we train them in providing addiction care, and we're trying to get them to extend recovery monitoring and support into primary care. So when people come in and get a flu shot, they ask, hey, how's your recovery going? And if things aren't going well, they can reconnect them with us. And we also do something called the Unicorn Project, which we were frustrated with the fact that drug-free opioid recovery, the argument isn't that it's better, the argument isn't that it should be the path or anything like that, but the argument was that it's a legitimate path. And a lot of the media right now is kind of painting it as not a legitimate pathway to recovery. So we realized we knew over 150 people in our community alone who were in long-term drug-free opioid recovery, and got a lot of people to share their story. So everybody in the website has 5 or more years of continuous recovery, and we wanted to show that in just one small town there's all this recovery and that it is a legitimate path. So, we've probably the biggest thing is hiring passionate staff who love addicts and alcoholics, and staying focused on recovery and continuing to learn from our clients. So I think I'm out of time, and I want to thank you for your attention, and I thank everybody here for this great conference. That's all I got. Thank you.